Hello, John Figdor. Welcome to our show.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
So you are an humanist chaplain, currently of Stanford, but formerly of Harvard. And the idea of a humanist chaplain is something that would be completely alien to our listeners. Like I myself have never met a humanist chaplain until today. So what is a humanist chaplain?
So humanist chaplains serve in the same capacity as a religious chaplain, meaning we often work from within the Office of Religious Life at a university. But unlike religious chaplains, we don't secretly believe in God. This is not a secret side gig. Uh, so it, uh, the way that we can define a humanist chaplain's role is three main purposes: creating community through hosting high quality public events that educate people about atheism, humanism, and the non-religious; providing counseling resources and pastoral care and support to students at the university; and then lastly, by serving as someone who can advocate for the student interest from within the Office of Student Life and make sure that atheist students get the same quality of programming that religious students do and the same access to resources like counseling and other things that religious students do.
What kinds of events do you have for especially for your non-religious students in your universities?
Sure, that's a great question. So there's a few things that we do. On one hand, we host high-profile, large speaker events with special guests like Richard Dawkins, where we'll reserve a large theater. We also have smaller guest speakers where we'll bring in people to talk about neuroscience, or just this week we have a speaker coming, Dr. Eugenie Scott, formerly of the National Center for Science Education, talking about how people can get hoodwinked into believing in bad science. So then we also have a weekly student meeting where students can get together and talk about their own beliefs, what's going on in their lives, what's going on in their research, and those social concerns that they have on their mind. So we really do a variety of different events on top of service projects and trips to San Francisco for film festivals and screenings.
So Darwin Day, was that something that you originated?
I did not create Darwin Day, but the founder of Darwin Day was the chair emeritus of my organization. Bob Stevens created Darwin Day, and we're very happy to have a burgeoning Darwin Day party out here at Stanford every year. I know that we had a great time doing it, and I'm sure they're still doing it at Harvard, where we would host these large speaker events and bring in fantastic folks from all over the campus. So I'm a big fan of Darwin Day. I think the idea of using Darwin as a figure is so powerful for many atheists, humanists, and non-religious folks, particularly people who come from a science background.
So you mentioned pastoral care and support. So is there an equivalent of, the usual confessions?
No.
What are the kinds of things that you do to provide pastoral care and support?
So let me explain the difference between how a humanist chaplain might come at these problems and how a religious chaplain might. Now, the way I see myself is I'm available to try to help students solve their problems, help them talk about big questions in life, talk about those things that faculty are not particularly interested in getting into, or they're concerned that are inappropriate for them to talk to students about. And so we're a little bit different from a psychological counselor, although what's really important is that we work alongside psychological counselors. So this is a strong difference. A religious chaplain might try to troubleshoot someone's alcoholism, someone's domestic violence problems, or any of these other issues on their own. Whereas we think that's profoundly irresponsible. We always work in conjunction with a psychologist, connecting people to mental health professionals who can better carry on the work of actual counseling. But we're there for support, for meeting them, for those meetings in between seeing their therapist, and for those conversations that aren't about necessarily their condition, but about how they're coping with their lives.
So these things that you do, it reminds me of a conversation that I think it was Sam Harris who had this, that if atheist or humanist organizations started focusing on the more nurturing side of activities, then it would attract more women in particular to the movement. And some people replied that he wasn't aware of the kinds of things that you guys were doing, that you guys, and it brings us
Yes,
to,
that's very true.
yeah, it brings us to the concept of your book, Atheist Mind, Humanist Heart, Rewriting the Ten Commandments for the 21st Century. So I haven't read the book. It isn't available yet in our bookstores. But when it is, like, why should our listeners pick it up, and what can they expect from it? Apart from everything that's published, let's say the new atheist books, what sets it apart from those?
Sure. So the Four Horsemen, all of whom I'm big fans of their writing, from Richard Dawkins to Sam Harris to Daniel Dennett to my personal favorite, Christopher Hitchens, they all wrote these fantastic books, but all those books share something in common, which is that they're about what atheists don't believe, what we reject. And that's an important question because we reject things like religiously imposed values on people. We reject things like superstition and taking beliefs from revelation. But at the same time, we think that there's an importance of talking about the positives as well. So our book focuses on the positive beliefs and values of the non-religious and doesn't focus on the God question. In fact, only one of our 10 non-commandments is even mentions God.
What are these 10 non-commandments? Like, can you give us just some of them, just to give our listeners an idea?
Sure. So the book is divided into two parts. The first half of the book is about the nature of reality and how we can understand the world around us. And the second half of the book is about ethics and human behavior. From the first half of the book, we can take one of our ideas is that that belief ought to be proportional to the evidence. So what do we mean when we say this? We mean that if you're going to make an ostentatious claim, you ought to have very good evidence to support that, and that you should follow the evidence where it lies, not try to massage the evidence into confirming your pre-existing beliefs. So this fits into our broadly scientific idea, our idea that we ought to embrace the scientific method and use it to help us understand the world around us. So that's an example from the first half of the book. And if people want to read more about that, I encourage them to check out the book on Amazon or watch some of the other videos that we've done about this. The second half of the book then deals with the idea of ethics and human behavior. And it contains a number of different ideas. Probably the most controversial among them, and my favorite, is the idea that morality is subjective and not objective.
I see it that the first part of the book is the atheist mind part, and the second part of the book is the humanist heart part. So let's talk about that for a bit, because a lot of people associate intellectualism with atheism, and humanism with the more emotional side. So why do you think there is this dichotomy that has to be addressed here? And you kind of touch on it with the title alone, Atheist Mind, Humanist Heart.
Sure. Well, we thought the title was clever, but we don't want to give people the idea that you're either an intelligent atheist or you're a happy, heart-warm humanist. What the reality is that most of us have both of these sides operating at all times, and we're balancing them. And the atheist mind side, we just chose to focus on the analytic thinking side. The humanist side, we decided to focus on the idea of empathy and compassion. But really, there are no Spock-like pure atheists who don't care about other people. And at the same time, we feel like there's certainly not a reality to the idea of humanists being brainless. But I think there is an issue of the focus here. And I think that sometimes the new atheists, because they focus so much on the intellectual question of whether God exists or not, sometimes they forget that what often motivates people's behavior is not necessarily purely their ideas about the afterlife and their ideas about religion, but the ways that they're affected in this world. And so we think it's just as important to create community and to replicate those systems that religion has created that have given people meaning and value, but from a non-religious perspective, from a non-faith-based perspective, to serve as an alternative.
Creating community and happy, heartwarming relationships. This is not what people are used to when they think of atheists. When people think of atheists, they usually associate it with the firebrands, being confrontational, arguing, debating. So why is there this stereotype of the angry atheist who debate you into losing your belief in God? whatever happens.
So I don't know if there was ever any truth to this idea, but maybe I could see a case for it in like the 1980s when the percentage of atheists was a tiny, tiny, tiny segment of the American population. It would stand to reason that with a population that small, it would only be the most passionate and aggressive individuals who were going to maintain that ideology. But let's be honest, we don't live in that world anymore. We don't live in a world where 2% of the US population is atheist. I don't know if you've seen this, but according to Barna.org, which is a Christian polling firm, they just released results of a poll in in October of this year, that shows that 38% of Americans are effectively non-religious. That's a totally different number. And this whole stereotype of atheists are just these nasty, mean people. 2 out of 5 Americans are essentially secular. I don't think 2 out of 5 people that I know are nasty and mean people. I think that as now it's becoming more common and more acceptable to be an atheist, we're just going to have this stereotype fall away because it's just not true.
From a few months back, and it's starting to have a resurgence since that Sam Harris and Bill Maher interview. There has been this backlash against the new atheists. You know, people criticizing Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris, but particularly Richard Dawkins. They've all been dogpiling on him, or a lot of them have. What do you think is behind this backlash of authors or of even fellow atheists who have been criticizing Richard Dawkins and saying that, you know, something as harsh as sometimes as harsh as he's irrelevant and he's no longer a boon to the movement, but a bane even.
I think that what we're finding out is that the atheist humanist movement is a lot more diverse than we originally thought it was. It's true that there is a significant portion of the movement who is primarily interested in atheist activism. That's fighting against getting the words "under God" taken out of the pledge, the idea of removing "under God" from our currency, the idea of fighting in school districts where they have required prayers or they have prayer banners, like in Cranston, Rhode Island. And that's a very important issue, and that's something that a lot of atheists take as their central claim. But on the other hand, there's a new emergent group of atheists and humanists who I'm going to guess this kind of describes me to some extent. They grew up in a broadly secular place. They currently live in a pretty secular place like I do in San Francisco Bay Area, where 45% of us are non-religious. And their focus is not on the everyday presence of religion because for us, mostly religion is a minor presence in our lives. We're not constantly victimized by religion in our circumstances. And so our focus is not necessarily on the damage done by religion, but on the positive things that atheists and humanists can do. And I just kind of wish that both of these sides could get together more and see the good in what they do. That you can't, the criticism of religion is absolutely essential. Like it's beyond absurd some of the racist and sexist things that are held by modern religious organizations. But at the same time, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and we can admit that the idea of community, not religious community, but community is worthwhile.
Okay, so you mentioned, you know, both sides. So there's certainly a rift in the secular movement in the US right now, and it centers mostly on the issues of sexism and feminism, right? So do you think that it's enough to call yourself a humanist? Because a lot of people, when the idea of feminism is presented to them, they commonly respond with, I'm not a feminist. I'm a humanist. I'm for everyone, not just for women. So this has been a common point of contention recently. And what's your take on it?
It's always strange to me whenever I meet someone who says, I'm not a feminist, I'm a humanist. I guess I'm in a weird place. I'm a humanist and I'm a feminist, so I'm kind of both. But as to this question of the deep rift in the movement, I think I'm one of the deep rift skeptics out there, where I say, yes, this exists in the blogosphere, and yes, it exists in the online world, but I just don't see it played out in the local community. And I work with 4 or 5 of them in the Bay Area here. For example, in the Stanford group, we have discussions about very controversial subjects involving feminism on a pretty regular basis. And we don't have a strong contingent of people who think that's inappropriate or mission drift. And I've I've actually not seen as much of this dynamic playing out in person as I've seen playing out online. And online, I've seen it get quite vicious, and I kind of have tuned out a little bit from the blogosphere as a result. But when I meet with local atheists and humanists or skeptics, I find people who are really broadly rational and interested in the same questions that I am, and they aren't set off by words like feminism or gay rights or any of these issues. They're a progressive bunch.
That's good to hear then. You have a very good community there.
And I would say this was also the case at Harvard as well. And I think that as these communities develop and they become more mature and they develop larger memberships, that we'll see this burgeoning throughout the U.S. I don't think this is something that's unique to Harvard and Stanford. I think you'll see it everywhere.
I'd like to know about the participation or the demographic of your membership. Like here, we have you know a good 20 to 30% at best, are women who participate in our activities, to attend our meetups. So is it the same in your community? Like, what is it like? Like, what's the percentages?
Our student group has fairly good statistics. We're quite a diverse group in terms of where we come from. But in terms of gender, that is the one place where we've been lagging. Although we now have new female leadership in the organization and we've seen an uptick in attendance. I think, let me be quite blunt about this. This is something that we faced at Harvard as well. And what I've found is that if you put women in leadership positions, trustworthy, thoughtful women who want to do this work, then people will start to say, hey, look, I see people like me reflected in the leadership, and they're more likely to become involved with the organization. And that's when I saw when I helped the humanist community at Harvard grow and increase its leadership. And that's why we have Sarah Chandonnet, for example, who's there. I believe now she's their fundraising director, who helps show people that you can be a woman and be an atheist. It's not strange or uncommon at all. And that's the same position that we are out here, where we now have student leadership that's much more diverse than it used to be.
Other than what you just mentioned, giving women leadership positions, like what else can secular communities do to be more encouraging for women to participate in their movements? And a follow-up question to that is, like, do you think there's any truth to what Sam Harris said about the critical post being a
Yeah, I don't.
predominantly male thing?
So what I would say is this. The reason that I focus on leadership is that leadership is usually the one that plans the activities. And when I first came out to Stanford and started working with the student group, and I look around the table asking for ideas for meetings, it was mostly people who looked a lot like me giving the answers back. And I thought, whoa, wait, this is not a good idea. We have to get more diversity in here. We have to get different perspectives on campus. And as soon as we started to bring in student leadership from different groups, we ended up having more diverse programming and we ended up attracting a more diverse student body. Let me just think back to when I was serving at Harvard. We had a lot of interest in mothers expressing interest in having parenting programs at Harvard. So in order to help that demographic, we created programs specifically for that.
Okay. Speaking of leadership positions and of organizations and their relationship to women, this particular one doesn't have a very good one. The Catholic Church, its leader, the Pope, is coming soon to the Philippines. Now, there's been a lot of clamor because of this. Of course, it's a predominantly Catholic country, and even secular folk are more welcoming of this Pope than the last one. So, what's
Well,
your
he thinks we
take?
can go to heaven, right? I mean, that's not so bad.
I don't think so. I think Lombardi corrected him regarding that. As with a lot of good things that he says, they're often backtracked by someone else in the organization. But anyway, what do you think of Pope Francis?
So I actually like the guy. I think he's making some good changes, but this doesn't mean that I stop accusing his organization of committing some serious wrongs. So the fact that we now finally have a guy in the Vatican who's willing to acknowledge the humanity of the non-religious is a huge step forward and a wonderful change in the church. But that doesn't change the fact that the Catholic Church still has a real serious problem with pedophilia that they haven't addressed. Although I'm glad to see the new pope has taken some small steps moving in the right direction on this. They have a serious problem with women in leadership. I mean, you think atheist groups are bad. I mean, talk about zero women in leadership positions. It's beyond absurd. It's a no girls allowed club. It's beyond ridiculous. And the continuing anti-homosexuality is, just the icing on the cake. So as much as I like Pope Frank, as Bill Maher calls him, and I think that's a good way to think of it, and he seems like a good guy. I'd have a beer with him. I still think he needs to get his house in order and really start trying to make some serious changes. Um, and he's done some good things on poverty. So I have to be honest. We should give the guy credit when he's done good things, but we should hold his feet to the fire on the other problems.
A lot of very progressive people are still stuck in the Catholic Church. And what would be your message to them to invite them into organizations such as yours, to give them, an alternative?
Sure. So I don't think that I'm not one of these atheists who thinks that we have to convert religious people away. But to address the heart of your question, what I'd say to that person is, come on and join us. If you're interested in things like Darwin and evolution and science, and you want to learn about neuroscience and magic, then come to one of our events. You don't have to be a member. We're not some weirdo cult where you have to sign your life away if you want to come to one of my programs. The whole point is that these are supposed to be of interest to a broad spectrum of people. And so we invite religious people to come to our events, and maybe they'll learn something. Maybe we'll learn something from them. We're always happy to have it. And at Stanford, we have such great relationships with the other religious groups on campus. That really helps with that because I feel no compunction about sending my students to try a meditation with the Buddhist student group or a joint event with the Catholic student group. We do a lot of these types of outreach.
Great. So, John, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to reading your book. I'll probably download it from Amazon. And it was a pleasure talking to you.
It was such a pleasure to talk to you too. Thank you for having me on your show.